Okay, let's get on with our program. The next session, again, panel discussion led by Scott Cave, will be talking about local entities' procedures. Our panel will include from the Kiawah Island Community Association, Mark Ripple. From the Town of Kiawah Island Public Safety Committee, Chris Whittick. Town of Kiawah, Rusty Lamio. Kiawah Island Golf Resort, Yvonne Johnstone. From Phillips and Jordan, George Massengill. And from Seabrook Island CERT, we'll have John Reynolds.
Thank you for joining us for the afternoon session. We're going to be talking about the local plans from both the town of Seabrook Island, town of Kiawah Island, and the respective entities on those islands as well. So we have a great wealth of knowledge here up with me again on my left and my right. And I'm just going to ask these ladies and gentlemen to just kind of go down the line here and talk about their lessons learned from their perspective from Hurricane Matthew, and then we'll move on from there. So John, since it's your club, you're the representative from the club. Yeah, your club. You have the keys to the club. Why don't you talk about what the club learned and what were some of your key lessons learned? We'll just take this microphone and pass it on down to Heather and then work our way this way.
Okay, I'm John Wilcox. I'm the Director of Maintenance and Engineering for the club at Seabrook. I've been here for 18 years. I was, maybe the first dozen that was back on the island after the firefighters and Tommy West with utilities after Matthew. Our plan that we learned from Matthew was kind of got surprised by Berkeley cutting the power off, so we had to come up with a couple issues with that we really weren't expecting. Caleb and I both came out here. Caleb Elledge is the club manager. We both saw very quickly how much tree damage there was, and it was more than just a simple push and shove to get out of the way so the utilities could get around to their locales that they needed to. So we contacted our equestrian center, which had already evacuated all the horses out, and we dedicated one of those pastures where we could take the debris from the roads and get it cleared out as quick as possible. One thing, to stress, just like in all organizations, is communications is key. Trying to communicate with all entities that have decision-making responsibilities. Just got to attack it in small bites. Working with Scott and all the other entities that are up here on the stage today, we came up with set plans. So we have criteria that we're working with, and so even though you have to make some decisions right on the ground, a lot of them are already pre-made, and so we just try to follow the book, as they say. That's about all I can offer from the club. Are we doing questions? Or
well, we'll do questions
later?
at the end after we allow everyone to talk. Okay. But if you think you have problems or difficulties or challenges evacuating yourself, maybe your spouse, maybe some family members, personal belongings, imagine trying to evacuate, 30-some horses? 40 horses. Yeah, an amazing effort. So well done. All right, Heather from Seabrook POA, your perspective.
Thank you. We've gone over Matthew and what we could have done better, what we've learned. There are a lot of things, and our response to hurricanes really will vary depending on the severity of the event. One thing we did in this one, which I think we did well, was that Steve Hirsch and the maintenance team contracted with 5 different clearing companies way ahead of the storm, so that we had them on call for when we came back. One of the things that we learned that was a little disconcerting was the evacuation order was out, and we really didn't think that people would stay. We had a list of about 25 people when we finally closed the gate on Thursday night. We had a list of about 25 people, which I then sent to the fire department. We didn't realize that there were other people still here, and really, from our point, we just want to make sure everybody's safe, and we would be happy if you left and stayed safe. When we got back and the trucks were here clearing, I did notice that there were several people on the island in their vehicles were honking horns at the tree clearing people and telling them to get out of the way. It's really important that people understand we have a job to do, and the faster we can do it without interruption, the quicker it'll be over. We had a lot of questions, phone calls to security about things that we don't deal with, like why did you turn off the electricity? What are you going to do with the food in my freezer? When is the power coming back on? Things that we just have no control over and we don't know. So I'd like to encourage people to not do that anymore. And one thing we also learned was it was very important that we kept communicating on a regular basis. So the town would give us information, we would e-blast it and put it on Tidelines and on our website. And we've made the decision that if we ever have a future event, we will do them on a regular basis with a time stamp on it and say we'll be contacting you every 3 hours, even if we have nothing to say. No updates.
Yeah.
So I think that's important for people to know.
Very good.
Okay.
Okay. Chris, I know Mayor Weaver already gave his perspectives from the town of Kiawah Island, but certainly
Is my boss still here?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
Oh, there he is
there
in the back. Yes.
So no cutting up, okay? The primary comment I would like to make, given the reentry topic on this panel discussion, is that there's going to be some conflict in the future evacuations upon reentry. Because if you were to look at a public safety perspective, whether it's the sheriff's office or the EMS or the fire department, they all would argue that we should not have let anybody on the island until power was fully restored. And Mayor Weaver actually alluded to this in his comments. There is so much pressure from the residents, certainly of Kiawah, and I assume also from Seabrook, to let people have access back to their homes and to the island. But that assessment really needs to be involved with the public safety professionals. Because had we come back on the island and not had power for 5, 6, 7 or more days, it would have caused even more havoc than what we already had. So I would just highlight to everybody that that's going to be an ongoing issue for the assessment going forward, and for the next event, it may not be the same as it was for this event.
Great, thank you. Rusty, from your frontline perspective with the town of Kiawah Island, what did you see?
My name's Rusty Lamio. I'm the senior enforcement officer with the town. I've been, this is my 21st year with the town, but it was actually my first major event that I've dealt with. We've had some other small storms that we had debris, but not to this volume. In a two-part thing for you, evacuation, I thought, I don't know how Seabrook worked it, but as far as Kiawah, our evacuation went very well. We did have a number of people who stayed, and they made no notification to anybody. And when you hear the fire department and you hear the sheriff's department, when they make a comment like, well, if you're going to stay, give us your next of kin or your social security number, it sounds rash, but there's a reason for that. If you're on the island and that storm does turn and it's a major storm, we get storm surge, we get the winds, they're not going to be able to get emergency equipment back onto the island the day the storm starts. And if you're out there, if you're injured or you have medical condition, we don't know. So if you have a special needs or you can't evacuate, please let us know. Call the town, call EMS. Let us know. We're here to help you if you need to get out and you're shy about telling anybody that you have an issue. Don't be. Please call us and let us know. The re-entry aspect of it, what I found was problematic was a lot of people, of course, you have a home out here on the island and you're concerned what condition it's in. When we're opening up the town to come back in, our primary reason that we're there is for your safety. We want to make sure that the roads are clear, the power's back on, the water's on. And what we ran into, we had contractors out on the island that before the storm even ended, they were out cutting and pushing material off the roads. But the day we opened, they were still out on the roadways, and like was, said earlier, people are annoyed, they want to get to their house, but they have to realize these guys are working, they're out there on the roadway, they're not looking for you to come by with a car, they're out trying to get trees and debris off the road. And so it's very important that if you can stay an extra day without coming in, call. We have debris assessment teams out on the ground. If you're concerned about your house, between the town and the community association, we'll let you know. If there's a problem with the house, call us, leave a message, or talk to somebody who answers the phone, give us your address. We can get an idea of what the house, if there is any problems to it. But don't be in such a rush to get back, because when you come back, there might not be power, might not be water, and what are you going to do? You're not going to have groceries, you're not going to have anything to eat. The stores were empty, so that material is not going to be there unless you bring it in with you, and then you've got no way to, keep it from perishing. So help us, help you. Take your time coming back in. Wait till the mayors declare that it's safe to come back, and then come back in.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rusty. John, start with this, John. From the town of Seabrook Island, from a public safety perspective, what did you see as the key lessons?
Well, one thing that we encountered was the rapidity with which we went from the governor's Tuesday press conference announcing that there would be evacuation starting Wednesday morning and the evacuation order on Wednesday afternoon. So we had to move in the progress that we make under our plan to go from normal operating conditions to evacuation. It's a 5-step movement. So we had to go from what we characterize or call Condition 5, OPCON 5, which is normal operations, to OPCON 1, which is evacuation, in a span of 24 hours virtually. The other thing that impacted us was our town officials and our town administrator all have roles in the town's emergency response. And it turned out that we had one of the town council members was away on vacation, and our town administrator was incapacitated. He was recovering from surgery. So we were down 2 people for our emergency response team when this thing impacted Seabrook Island. So what we're doing as we look at updating our plan and reviewing the circumstances that we encountered with Hurricane Matthew is considering, first of all, we want to be sure that our town council members are available during the peak hurricane season. That just needs to be a requirement. The other thing that we're looking at is making better use of Seabrook Island CERT. When we came back on Sunday to do just a drive around to get some feel for what the conditions were, we had CERT team members. John Reynolds was with us, and he contacted other CERT team members to come in on Monday and help us do our preliminary damage assessment. But we've also identified other roles that where they could help the town with things that it needs to get done, both in the lead up to evacuation as we're trying to go through, as I say, these steps before we actually reach evacuation, as well as helping the town officials in their roles after we come back from evacuation.
Thank you. Excellent. So that's a great segue here to John Reynolds, who's with the Seabrook Island CERT team. CERT is CERT, stands for Community Emergency Response Team. It's a federal program that trains volunteers to supplement and to assist first responders as well as municipalities, really in surge capacity when the overwhelming requirements from a disaster exhaust the local resources that are available. And John, can you talk a little bit about the CERT team and what you all learned?
Yep. CERT became important in the aftermath of 9/11. That's when officials realized that if they had trained volunteers who could do similar thing that the first responder would be doing, we could serve more people. In terms of Matthew, one of the things for me was to know where certain people was going to evacuate to, so that I would be able to reach them if the town said, we need you to come back to the island and help us. So that was very important, just keeping track of where people were, because we were scattered all over the place. One of the other things that I've learned was that we left the island and we left our trailer on the island. And in the future, we have to get our trailer off the island. So I called the chief and asked her, when the fire department moved their truck, if they could move our trailer. But it was too late. And one of the reasons for me that the trailer is important, because in the trailer is our generators, our chainsaw, all of the medical supplies that we would use to take care of you was in the trailer. So if the trailer was damaged, how could we assist you? So that was one of the lessons that I learned, that we need to do more planning up front to make sure that we get our supplies out of danger as well.
All right, thank you, John. Now we have Mark here, Mark Ruppel, who was new to the Kiawah Island Community Association, but a long career with City of Charleston Fire Department.
Correct.
Right? So I know you don't have a lot of experience with Kika in terms of their experience with Matthew, but just maybe your own experience with Matthew and what you've gleaned from it and what you can share.
Well, Scott said I'm fairly new. I'm only on board about a month. I'm the Assistant Director of Security for Kiawah Island Community Association. And the one thing since I've been here a little over a month that I've noticed is how well the different entities, once you learn all the acronyms and figure out what's what, how well they communicate and work well together. And that's imperative, especially during a crisis. You're going to need that communication. So I've been very impressed with that so far. But that's a two-way street. That's not just the entities and us here on stage. That's you, the citizen. As Rusty said, you need to communicate your special needs to us. You need to communicate your concerns to us. And that's not a day or two before a storm. That's now, when things are calm and we can work things out and have a discussion. So I'm glad to be on board. I look forward to working with everyone, and thank you.
All right, thanks, Mark. Then we have George here from Phillips and Jordan, who is a national emergency response contractor that really specializes in all the big, heavy equipment that's needed to take care of this huge debris issue, vegetative and other type of debris issue after an event like a hurricane. And the question I'm going to ask George relates back to a question we had earlier, which is specifically the FEMA issue with regard to private gated communities and what challenge that presents and how we work through that challenge.
Well, thank you. As you know, we can't go behind a gate. FEMA doesn't reimburse unless you get a special, kind of a special authorization from FEMA to do that, to go on to private property and remove debris. So that's one of those things that continues to be an issue we kind of have to work through. I mean, it's mainly on public infrastructures, public roads, public right-of-ways, but there are exceptions, and I think that's where always, it's one thing that we have to constantly work together with the counties, with the cities, with associations, with FEMA representatives to sometimes be able to get past that and go on to private property. I know we did the majority of the work in Katrina, and Katrina is an example of that, where that kind of went by the wayside in private property. We could go on and get debris. So you just have to be aware of that and be aware of it. It's a constant moving target, I can tell you that, with FEMA, and not to be in a negative, not to sound negative, but it's a pretty complicated environment for us and for anybody to work in terms of trying to figure out what FEMA will reimburse, what FEMA won't reimburse, and so, you know, we continue to work with everybody to try to make sure we make the best of the situation and help in any way we can.
Great. George, can you also just address to the residents here, you know, what they can do to make your job easier? Obviously, it's in everyone's interest to get the debris off the roads, off the island as quickly as possible. So how can the residents
I think bringing
assist?
debris to the road, you know, bringing debris out and kind of coordinating that effort as quickly as possible, safely as possible, and helps us. And then, you know, being aware of, as you mentioned earlier, you know, of workers that are out there, you know, when things start getting complicated, and they do, and a lot of people trying to move around in different directions, you know, being very careful that you're safe and in the midst of all the heavy equipment that's being out there.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question I'm going to ask the panel relates to communications. We've heard communications come up as a constant theme throughout today's agenda and through the comments from many different speakers. So if several of you on the panel could just address this issue of how the towns, the property owner associations, clubs, and all the different entities coordinate together to provide consistent and comprehensive communication during a difficult time like a hurricane. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Rusty.
Chris can help, and our town administrator is down here, and, sorry. And Stephanie's here. Stephanie is the PIO with the town of Kiawah, and we found we've worked together with the community association and the resort on our island, and what we do now is we come up with one message that we're putting out. We're not putting out 3 or 4 different messages because it becomes very confusing. So what we've been doing the last almost 2 years now is working with the entities on our island to get the same message out to our people. Social media has exploded. There's Twitter, there's Facebook, there's so many different ways, and we have a number of different avenues that we get information out. Plus, during storm, we have what's called a MIOC, which is the Municipal Emergency Command Center. And this time we were up in Walterboro. The community association sat in with our personnel up there, and that's where the messages started from. They communicated to the people on the ground who were back on the island, and we relayed our information to them, and they put out a timely response. And these things, the websites, and any of these social medias, and we have them all listed, I think, in our book, don't we, Stephanie? Utilize them, because we try to get out that message, and we try to get it out as often as possible. Sometimes it'll sound repetitive that we're putting out the same message, but we're trying to get that out to everybody to see. And so as far as Kiawah, that's how we've been kind of doing it. And it seemed to work very well this year. The response we got back from people has been that they got timely information this time, and it seems to be working.
Great, thanks, Rusty. Anyone else?
Yeah, our plan calls for the creation of what we term public information statements. And during Hurricane Matthew, what we were doing primarily was issuing what we characterize as a public information statement that tries to convey whatever we've learned about the situation and what our response is to the residents. And we put those through the channels that we primarily rely on, or were relying on at the time, which includes the town's website, the town's Twitter feed, which will indicate that there's new information available at the town's website. We put out information on tide lines, and we put out the information to SAPOA for distribution by the SAPOA e-blast. Now, things that we didn't use, the town has a toll-free number, which is 888-314-3177, that wasn't used during Hurricane Matthew. And I think this morning someone commented that when they called the number, it said everything is normal. We did put out one announcement via Code Red. Our plan actually contemplates that we would make greater use of Code Red than we did during Hurricane Matthew. And of course, our plan contemplates that we will use the toll-free number as another channel for our public information statements. So those things clearly will require some improvement in our response. But in addition to that, as the mayor said this morning, we've now moved to being able to distribute email messages directly to residents. We rely on the Property Owner Association email address list, which gets updated periodically. We'll be receiving updates from SEPOA on a quarterly basis. And we're in the process of considering improvements that could be made to our website so that the way the website currently is, once it's placed into what we call emergency configuration, you get a crawler or a banner, and then there's a block in the middle of the home page where text appears. But what we really want to do is we want to be able to do as Kiawah did, which is archive the messages that we're putting out so that in the event that someone has missed something at the time it went out, they would be able to access that information through the archive at the website. So these are things that are being looked at, and I think that we will make good progress in improving that channel for communication. As I said, we do have this facility now for us to issue email messages directly. I will not suggest that Twitter would be used for anything much more than to inform our residents. The Twitter feed can be used to inform the residents that there's an update available at the website, but you understand that there's a character limitation built into Twitter, and it's impossible to use Twitter to convey an entire paragraph of information. So it doesn't work for that, but it will work for letting you know that there's information available. And as the mayor indicated this morning, our residents are encouraged to have their Twitter subscriptions and follow the town of Seabrook Island. Our Twitter feed is at Seabrook Island, ISLND 87.
Thank you. And the town of Kiawah Island's Twitter account, Stephanie, is, know that off the top of your head? Town of Kiawah, SC. Okay, great. The last question, sorry, John.
For your information, CERT have ham radios so that we can communicate to the outside world if our phone lines and stuff is down. We have a base station that is located at the fire department upstairs in the fire department. So that's the way we would communicate out to the outside world. But during Matthew, Heather and her group was doing good communication, so I was following what they was doing, but I was also blessed the fact that someone from Kiawah in their security department was communicating with me and letting me know what was happening so I could relate it to the rest of the team.
Okay, good. Thank you, John. And the last question I'll ask the panel before opening up to your questions relates to return of not just residents. We've talked about residents already to some extent today, but more towards contractors and insurance adjusters, which I know are two key groups of people that, of course, all the residents are very interested in having their ability to return quickly. So could the towns and maybe even the POAs as well to some extent talk about the process of expediting the return of contractors and insurance agents to the town?
Sure. We looked into the question that we expect to be faced with a very high demand to have contractors who will come out to do what is referred to as mitigation. So it's the blue tarpers, but you can't put the blue tarp on the roof until you've got the tree pulled off of it. So we know that we're going to have contractors that are going to come out that have to do some tree work, and we know that we're going to have contractors who will be asked to come out to do the blue tarping. This is before we have resident return, and what our expectation is that while we may still be under an evacuation order, but we're trying to get started with recovery, that the town will be looking for some reliable indication from the contractors that they've been asked to come out to do some work at a residence by the owner. And to the extent that we're able to verify that, we would permit them to come on in and do that work. But they're not coming out for the long term. Or if we have insurance agents who are coming out to do some sort of inspection, or a homeowner comes out to do some sort of inspection, in this early phase, what we're considering is that there's a limited access, that people can be there to do that inspection, but they cannot reoccupy their residences. Until we've actually had an opportunity to have structural inspections done, which we will have done for us by Charleston County Building Services, it's not possible for us to know whether or not a particular residence is safe to be occupied. So while we understand that everyone will be keen to know what's the condition of their home, at the same time, we can't just have people coming in and occupying structures that may be unsafe. So we've looked at this as doing this in a couple of phases, where you have the initial, as I say, mitigation, to take a look, the inspection, and then later on, when we have a better handle on the situation on the ground within the town, it will be possible to begin to do the remediation, the repairs and so forth, and we will base a decision on resident return at that point on the conditions of what is the access by the roads that serve the community, what's going on within the community as far as debris removal. Do we have the public safety services, fire, EMS, and security, and do we have utilities? As we've already heard this morning, if we don't have electricity, we're not going to really be able to have sewerage services for the indefinite term. That requires generator power. You can imagine the difficulties of keeping generators up 24 hours a day for weeks on end if it came to that. So it's very crucial that in order to consider it to be a safe environment for our residents to return, that we have a good feel for what's the condition of our utilities.
Okay, very good. I will also just make note for you all to understand this process for reentry. If you have contractors and insurance agents or insurance adjusters that you know would likely have to come to your property, please make sure that they're aware that they may have to register with the state and or counties to have reentry access. Most of them may know this or should know this, but it's not just as simple as showing their contractor's license or other credentials. There is an established reentry program for businesses that the state emergency management has, a rather new program, but more importantly, the counties have. And Charleston County has it on their website. State EMD has it on their website. There's lots of detailed information there. Just make sure your contractors and agents and adjusters know that there is that program in place for them to be able to get registered for reentry before the public is allowed to come back in, because that's more than just a town issue. Likely they would have to travel through a county checkpoint before they would even get to the town. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up to you all for questions that you have here. Yes, ma'am, right up front here.
So we moved here last July and had been here 3 months when we had to evacuate.
Welcome to Charleston.
Yeah, welcome to Charleston. That's exactly right. We already had 2 tropical storms before that.
That's right.
It was pretty intimidating. But because we were so new, the only people we knew here were off the island as well. Now, I've heard all of you say that you would so much prefer for all of us to not come back right away, and I would agree with that. And we did not come back for other reasons. But something that would ease that is if somehow you could put together some volunteers who would be willing. I tried desperately to find someone who would go look at my house just to tell me, did I have a tree on the roof, or did it look flooded? And I didn't know that. I didn't have that information, and I think you could get people to wait longer if you could dedicate some people to do that job for us.
Yeah, good question. So let me open up to the panel and see who can respond to that.
I can respond to that. As far as the town of Kiawah is, we have a damage assessment team that goes out initially, and we'll check every structure on the island. And all this information has to be relayed back to the county, which in turn goes to the state. So we will have means, it may not be the first day or second day, depending on the severity of the storm, how we can get out to all parts of the island. But we will have that information in a data form. We have a computer program that compiles this, that we turn into the state, also in the county. So if we have an emergency number on there, that's something you can call us. I ask that, don't do it the day after the storm, because it's not going to be there. But within a couple days of that ending of the storm, we will be able to give you some kind of idea of what the house is, what the condition is.
I'm not Seabrook, so let's
Okay. Sorry, you didn't say that.
Well, it's the same responsibility for Seabrook as it is for Kiawah. We are under a request from Charleston County to provide them what we refer to as a preliminary damage assessment. And that is primarily intended to collect information about how many structures are destroyed, how many are severely damaged, and how many are moderately damaged and how many are affected. So these reports are used to collect information that drives an assessment of damage in dollar values for purposes of getting the benefit that comes from, for example, a disaster declaration and FEMA participation in funding. What we did for Hurricane Matthew, our teams were out, well, initially Sunday afternoon, but we didn't get a very good look at what we couldn't get very far around on the island on Sunday afternoon. By Monday morning, we had help from CERT, and we completed what we were doing as a preliminary damage assessment. Unfortunately, we didn't have a good understanding of what the information was that we needed to collect. So the good news, in one sense, for our residents was we collected more information than was needed for our responsibility to the county, but we compiled a report of what we had observed as far as damage to structures. Now, we were not able in all instances to do a walk around a house, so from the street where we're conducting the assessment, you could see that there might be something out on the front of the house, or something. You might see part of something that's on the back of a house. You might see something hanging over a structure. But if the damage to a structure was not apparent from the street where we were looking, then we might not have noted that there was structural damage to that property. When we did put out, and I believe it went through Tidelines, but in any case, we did put out a report of what we had observed within, I think, about a week of our return. So again, you have to bear in mind that Hurricane Matthew was kind of a light hit, and we were able to do things within days that if we were looking at a Category 3 storm that hit Seabrook Island, we wouldn't actually be able to do that kind of work in that short period of time. And there isn't any way to shortcut the need to be able to have access. We can't get here if Bohicket Road is covered in trees. We can't get around on the island if the roads on the island are covered with trees. And until there's enough what we call push and shove, it's cut and push, whatever you want to call it, to have a path on the roadways to be able to get out, we aren't going to be able to collect a lot of information. And it's not so much, I would say, a problem of not having people to do it, because certainly Seabrook Island CERT are trained in doing this sort of work, and they're more than willing to make themselves available to do it. But there are difficulties in getting out and really getting a good feel for what the conditions are.
I would just add to that and say, if you are interested in volunteering in some capacity, talk to John Reynolds about the CERT team, because those are the people who get trained to assist. There's no guarantee, of course, that you would be able to do that, but at least that's the group of people who the town would call on for assistance if needed. Okay.
Good. Scott,
Yes,
can I say, the other thing I think you have to keep in mind, if CERT goes out and assert your home, we mark your home, say it's inhabitable. I can't give that information to you because that information has to go to the town or the county and FEMA. So you just have to be aware of that. You know, as if you know me, I say, hey, my friend. Okay?
All right, let's move on. Yes, sir.
This is a really interesting discussion. I would ask, what is your primary responsibility to first? The property owners that through assessments and taxes keep you in business, the county or the state? Certainly as a property owner, my biggest concern was, did I have any damage to my property due to flooding and or roof damage or whatever? Luckily, at least in Seabrook, some neighbors stayed behind and posted their email addresses, and they were able to walk through and give us an instantaneous, you're okay, you had a limb on your truck, you're okay, the property's good. So I would ask you all, I mean, the best thing we wanted, I think, would be immediate communication as soon as possible. Did we have some or none property damage? If you all are generating that information, I would like that information to be put online or communicated ASAP. So I guess the question is, who is your primary responsibility for? And to? Thank you.
Who'd like to address that question first?
Yeah, I'll start, and then you cover me, okay? From a public safety standpoint, our first priority, I'm sorry, is it better? Okay. Our first priority has to be public safety. It has to be to make sure that anyone on the island is taken care of who needs attention, that the roads are cleared so that the emergency vehicles can get through. What you're really talking about is more of an informal arrangement because people stayed behind who were supposed to leave. I'm in the same boat. I was in Charlotte, and I had friends on the island who went by and looked at my house. It's the same suggestion you just made. And I agree with the suggestion. It was the first thing on my mind as well, is what type of damage. But from the professional standpoint, whether it's the sheriff's office or the fire department or the EMS, their concern isn't with the property owner's situation. It's with their safety.
Well, what I heard is that you are collecting this information soon to allow the county to do a bona fide damage assessment. If you are collecting the information, okay, you have the information. What I am asking is what precludes you from putting that online? You've done the survey, even though I'll bet a preliminary survey, to alleviate property owners' concerns that they may or may not have damage. I don't think I'm asking an unreasonable question. I'm just trying to say if the information is being generated, it's being compiled, what prevents you from posting that informally with whatever caveats you guys want to put on? Thank you.
Yes, sure. Yeah. Stephanie, would you mind bringing the...
Look,
You're absolutely right. I mean, we know that the number one issue for all people who are evacuated is what's the condition of their house. Absolutely true. The survey that we do is what they call a windshield survey. It's done in gross from the road to the extent that the road is passable. I agree that if we've got that information, we've got to find a mechanic to make that information available to you as promptly as possible. Whether it is putting it on the website, which is probably the best thing we can do if we're physically capable and technically capable of doing that. Possibly establishing a hotline for you to call in and have somebody check. The problem with that, as I alluded to earlier, we've got a staff of 3, 2 of whom are, probably all 3 of whom are gone. So you're dealing with me. I may pick up the phone. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is I recognize and acknowledge your concern. You're absolutely valid. I would never argue with that. That's absolutely what you need to know. Our job is to try to be able to get you that information as promptly and as accurately as possible. One of the things I think I mentioned in my talk earlier today is that we've established communication with the fire department. I hope that as soon as after the storm pass and the fire department is able to get on the island, at least in gross, we should be able to tell you Baywood area has been hit very hard, or Mallard Lake area has not been hit very hard. To get it to you in gross, and then as the days pass and as we get more definitive information, we'll try to convey that to you as promptly as possible.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. I think also a lot of this information that's being collected preliminarily is intended to just provide numbers of damaged homes, not necessarily exact locations of where they are. So that's another challenge in that process. Let's do one more question, then I'm sorry that we do have to move on with our agenda. We'll go to the mayor in the back of the room.
No, I just want to reinforce Ron's comment. From Kiawah's standpoint, our goal would be to get exactly to the kind of position in place that you described. Our lack of being able to do it in last October wasn't a matter that we didn't think it was important or it wasn't an objective. We just simply didn't have the capability to do it. But I would share the same vision, and as soon as we can find a way and the capability in Kiawah that we could provide property owners with accurate information about the situation with their homes, we will do it. I think, like Ron alluded, our initial go-through was a windshield, a front street look. And one of the concerns we got antsy about was we didn't want to tell a property owner, hey, we went by your house, it looked great, everything's fine. What we didn't realize is in the back, when a tree went through, and then they show up with a totally wrong view. So we want to get there. We're not there yet, but it's not because we don't want to.
Very good. Okay, so thank you very much to our panelists up here. Appreciate your time and expertise. If you have additional questions one-on-one, most of them will be sticking around. We only have another half hour or so left, but I'm sure you can interact with them after the agenda is done. So I am done for the day. I'm going to turn this back over to John Gregg to introduce our last 2 sessions, which I think you'll find very, very helpful and informative as well.